Today I'm gonna take this raw file of a snowy house in the forest and I'm gonna turn it into a picture like this at the end. Alright, so the first thing I want to do here is decrease the exposure as well as increase the contrast by around 20 to make everything more dramatic and dark. Also want to definitely bring down the highlights by -100. That will have a huge impact in terms of the detail in the snow. Then the next thing is definitely the whites. I love bringing them to the right, adds a lot of dynamic and interest, but at the same time just want to make sure that you hold down the Alt key and don't clip anything. So I think I'm just gonna keep it at pretty much the maximum I can go. Now in terms of the blacks, I do think I might even bring them up a little bit. And in terms of the shadows, just gonna bring them up slightly as well. Now for the clarity, I do actually think that I want to add a little bit of plus clarity in the foreground, but minus clarity in the background. So I'm just going to keep the global clarity at 0 and grab a graduated filter with some minus clarity over the background, just like that. Then add a new one, go adjust a little bit into the plus clarity and drag that into the foreground. Gives the picture just a little bit more differentiation and depth. So going down, I'm actually going to leave out the vibrance and saturation for now. Same with the color temperature, and that is so I can go into the split toning. Just click on this little box next to the highlights, go into the warm tones here, and kind of the idea that I have for this picture is to add quite a lot of warmth in the highlights, and then at the same time go into the shadows and add some darkish blues, although not quite that much saturation. I want to make sure that I have the exact hue that I want here, so yeah, just something like that. And once again, not that crazy in terms of the saturation. So just from before any split toning to after, we've managed to get a little bit of a kind of boring colored picture into a much more dreamy and interesting picture. So going up again, I do think I'm gonna fine tune the color temperature though. And you know, this is a winter picture, so I want to have a little bit of cold and blue in there, but at the same time not too much either. I think I'm gonna keep it relatively bluish overall and then maybe work with local adjustments later on. And with the tint, I think I'm just gonna leave it where it was. So going down, once again, gonna leave out the vibrance and saturation still. Now tonal curve, just gonna play around with this as well. Perhaps I can actually go a bit into the plus highlights in the tonal curve and then in exchange bring down some of the whites. Now the tonal curve highlights will really just affect the very bright parts, so very different to any of the basics adjustments. Then with the other sliders, I'm really not sure if I even want to adjust them, but I'm just gonna real quick go through them, not very much time to spend here anyways, so I'm just gonna say I'm gonna keep it like this. Now this is before this tonal curve and here's after. Especially if you look at the snow, there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the interest and dynamic. Then going down, I'm definitely not gonna cover every tool here, but I do want to add just a little bit of sharpening around 60, also want to bring that mask into the right. And again, here you can hold down the Alt key and everything that is white is going to be sharpened and everything that is black is not going to be sharpened. And another thing that I love here in the detail tool is the color slider. You just want to bring that all the way to the right to get rid of any of the purple and green sensor noise that you might have lurking in the shadows. Just a very simple thing to do and can have a really huge impact. Going down to the lens corrections, however, I'm definitely gonna remove the chromatic aberration here, so any of the green and purple fringing will also get removed, especially on these branches. You can see really a huge difference. And I'm gonna enable my profile corrections and just choose my lens to get rid of the distortion and vignetting. So going down, transform, nothing I'm gonna worry about here. Effects, I'm actually gonna add some vignetting here. Might seem a little bit weird removing it at first, but it's really a different kind of vignetting with much more control. So I'm just gonna bring it to -100 for now, so I can adjust the feather And I think I'm gonna bring that all the way to the right, while bringing the midpoint actually all the way to the left. So this is a really important thing for this picture, because everything is so bright and so, you know, it doesn't look bad at all, but I do want to make this picture very dark and dramatic and moody. So by going into the minus amount with the vignetting here, I can really achieve this look and make it very dark and very dramatic. So around minus 50 amount in this case might differ on picture to picture and of course to your taste. But for this photo, yeah, maybe I'm gonna fine tune just the sliders a little bit, but I do think that looks pretty good. Now, before I go into the camera calibration adjustment, I do think that I have to fix the color temperature here because it's way too cool, way too blue. So I'm gonna go back up to color temperature slider and just make the entire picture much warmer. That definitely looks a lot better. So going down again to the camera calibration, this is the last and final global adjustment. The first thing that you have here is the camera profiles, and you can go through all of them. It will change your overall appearance and color of the picture, but it's not that big of a deal, especially in this photo, so I'm just gonna skip it. It's all about playing around with the different settings. And speaking of playing around with different settings, the same is true with the sliders down here. Now, in terms of the shadows, I do think I'm gonna make it a little bit more magenta-y there. Other sliders, the primary color sliders, if you will change any color, it will also affect the other colors as they're made out of the respective colors, at least to a certain degree. It's kind of difficult to explain, but all you have to know is that you want to be careful here. As with the profiles already, play around with it, see what you like best and stick there. It's once again very, very different from picture to picture, but going to the greens here, this should have a little bit of a bigger impact than the reds, as there are some greens in the trees and so on. But yeah, a little bit into the minus, just like that hue a bit more, and going to the saturation, just perhaps a bit into the plus, and with the blues are gonna be of course the major thing here, as there are mostly blue in this photo. But I'm just gonna, I think, make it relatively neutral and then also decrease some of the saturation. Lastly, a quick before and after. So this is before, this is after. Nothing huge, nothing game changing, but just a little bit more neutral and better looking in my opinion. So going back up, what I'm gonna do lastly here in the global adjustments before I finally go into the local ones is go to all of my settings, just see if I want to change anything, and perhaps I'm gonna increase some of these warm tones in the highlight, split toning a bit, just to around 80 from 70. The shadows look just fine how they are, and also in terms of the other global adjustments, there's not really anything I can see at the moment. So I'm gonna say that I'm done in terms of the global adjustments. Now I'm gonna go into the local adjustments, the graduated filters and radial filters mainly. But let's take a quick look from the raw file to the picture so far. It's definitely more interesting, love the color so far, but there is a lot more to be done. Alright, so I know this video has been very fast and quick paced so far, so let's take a second to look at the entire lighting, because lighting is very important for the local adjustments. Now, if you look at this photo, you will notice that there is no direct sunlight. It's all very muted, very low key, and I absolutely love this about this picture. Especially look at the distance here. You can barely see the trees on this hillside. It has a very mysterious and very unique feel to it. Look at this glow of this faint orange in the sky, for example. So yeah, it is very important to just take a look at your picture, see the entire lighting scheme, and then see what you want to do with it. And I believe, first of all, I am going to go a little bit into the plus exposure for the sky. Now, I always want to make sure I have a very soft feather for any type of these graduated filters. And you know, it's just 0.16, it's really nothing crazy. I don't want to make it look something like that at the end. It would just not work for this dark and gloomy mood. So just around, yeah, 0.16 works pretty well. Then grabbing another one, also with a very soft edge here, in pretty much parallel actually over the other side of the picture, and going a bit into the minus exposure. Again, just a hint, nothing crazy. Then I might even add another graduated filter over the top left, and this time I don't want to change any of the exposure, but just go into the color. So let's see what I can do here. Perhaps I'm gonna make this a little bit more dark bluish. Always want to make sure you refine everything, you fine tune and handle it correctly. About, yeah, I'd say around 35 saturation should work quite well. Angling it a little bit differently, but that should work just fine. Then going over the very top of the picture, I'm gonna add another filter with, I believe, some minus exposure. And this is to close out the picture, and closing out means that the top and the bottom becomes a little bit darker, and yes, I'm also gonna do that with the bottom here, and the reason for that is so you can contain the viewer's eye within the picture. So it really works well if I show you from before that one on the top to afterwards, it is definitely a noticeable difference. So yeah, maybe I'll have to fine tune it once again to make it not quite as dark, but I do think I'm also gonna add another one, once again, this time without any exposure, and angle it over the top right, kind of similarly as I've done with the top left, but this time I'm gonna go into some other color. I'm not even sure which one yet, but perhaps a little bit of a magenta-y, purplishy color like that, and just add a hint of saturation. Once again, this picture really doesn't need a lot, but just a bit in the right places. And yeah, that's pretty much all I can think of in terms of the graduated filters. So from before any to after, it might not have seemed like a huge difference as I've added these filters one by one, but as a whole it is actually quite noticeable, while still keeping this natural and mysterious look. So going further into the adjustment brush, just really quickly, for the adjustment brush there's really only one I want to add, and that is with minus saturation. Generally speaking, want to make sure that you have your feather and flow at 100 for a very natural and smooth result, and I always like to turn off auto masking so I can choose myself which areas I want to select and which I don't. So I'm just gonna decrease some of the saturation in the top left here. If I press down the O key, you can see what I kind of do. Once again, this is just around -40, so nothing too crazy. And if you've done a little bit too much, you can also hold down the Alt key and get a minus adjustment brush and get rid of any of the effect you've added previously. So holding down O again, just so I actually see what I'm doing here. Yeah, I do think that's pretty much all I'm gonna do in terms of the entire adjustment brushes, to be honest. Here's from before to after. This is just not something I could have done with the graduated ones. So going into the last and final local and global and everything adjustment for this picture is the Radial filters for dodge and burning, and I absolutely love the Radial filters. As for general settings, feather at 100 and inverting the mask, then I'm gonna add first of all kind of a big filter over the house here, and I do want to make it just a little bit brighter and mix that with some purplish color to really make the wood pop and a little bit more interesting. It doesn't have to be a lot of saturation, but around, 10-15 would work quite well. So going on, grabbing another filter, this time with a little bit more plus exposure, around a third of a stop, and also some warmth in terms of the color. I'm gonna add one over the picture here, see how it looks, then fine adjust everything, go a little bit less into the plus exposure, but in exchange a little bit more into the plus white. And what I'm gonna do with that is just go over all of the boring areas and make them a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting. And once again, this photo really doesn't need any crazy dodge and burning, any crazy plus or minus exposure. It needs a very subtle adjustment. And with these filters, what's great, you can just right click and duplicate, and that way it becomes very easy and fast. But you can also angle them, and if you hold down the Alt key, you can also just make one side of the filter bigger or smaller. So just angling like that, and you know, it doesn't even need that much exposure in this area right here. Just right click and duplicate, perhaps a little bit more in the foreground, going into the color and adjusting that a little bit. You know, this is also not really the picture where there is a ton of dodge and burning needed, because it is such a subtle and soft, mysterious overall looking photo. So don't go overboard with these filters. In some pictures there's definitely a lot of potential, and in some there is a little bit less. So always go according to the picture, don't just add a ton of filters for the sake of adding filters. Always make sure that it still works at the end. So with that being said though, I do think I'm also gonna add a little bit of plus exposure in the sky, just like that. And perhaps make this spot individually a little bit more orange, maybe a bit more into the color. Definitely around 30 won't hurt. And then I think I'm gonna right click and duplicate this filter, go over the right and get rid of all of the exposure, because now I just want to play with the color and see what I can do here. Perhaps more, a bit more into the yellowish color, and once again keeping the saturation looking natural. So it's all about differentiation, it's all about complexity. And speaking of that, I might add another one here, and I mean, this is not the color I want at all, but just adding a very white filter here, just like that. And the great thing about this crazy color is that you can see where the actual effect will be. But the whole idea I have here is to once again do the exact same thing as I did on the right. Just kind of make this left portion a little bit more interesting. So here is a lot of kind of faint warm tones mixed with blues. So maybe I can mix a little bit of magenta in there or some purple. So yeah, let's find a tonality that works first of all. Kind of this pink should work quite well. And in terms of saturation, I don't think I can go too far here at all. But around 10? Yeah, it actually does work. It makes it more interesting, even if you don't really notice. But look at from before this one filter to after. It is definitely an interesting difference. Yeah. Okay, so once again doing this exact same thing, but this time on this very left part here. And I'm gonna angle the filter in a vertical way this time and go into the color. And let's see what I want to do here. Perhaps kind of a darker blue. And yeah, this actually really works. So once again, just a hint of saturation, and that will really look great. So overall, in terms of the plus exposure filters, I'm pretty much done, but now I'm also gonna add some minus exposure ones. First one is gonna be on the foreground, on this rock right here. Now, I don't think there is really too much opportunity for minus exposure. There are already so many dark shadows, but yeah, there are some filters I want to do here. A very narrow one on this house, just to make one side of the house a little bit darker, a little bit more interesting by creating differentiation. Maybe also add another one over there, kind of a bigger one over the entire right side of this forest here. And yeah, that is pretty much it. So you might think to yourself, well, what is really the difference? It looks the same as before, doesn't it? Well, let's take a look at from before any dodge and burning to after. It is not a huge difference for sure, but if you look at the sky, if you really look closely at these areas of the photo, you will notice how much more, well, how much less interesting comparatively to after it looked. So I really think I went as far in terms of the dodge and burning as I could for this picture, because once again, this is a very subtle, a very mysterious overall picture, so I couldn't go as far as in some of the other photos. But the point is, you don't have to do that. You can still add differentiation, still add a lot of interest without making it look overdone or crazily heavily edited. Now, as I said before, I am done completely with the Radial filters, but there is just a quick saturated filter that I want to add over the very bottom of the picture, and that is for this graduation. As you can see, it's kind of bluish and cold in a very harsh way, so I'm just gonna make it a bit warmer. I don't mind it being colder than the rest of the photo, but I just don't want to have it as such a huge difference because it kind of looked fake, to be honest. So just gonna make it a bit warmer, and that definitely helps a lot just from that one filter here. Then going on, I'm gonna check the picture real quick before I say that I'm finally done. There's definitely a lot more that you could do with the vibrance and saturation. You can bring it up and down, but I really think it looks great how it is right now, and I'm not gonna do anything in terms of that. A thing that I might consider though is the cropping. Now there are some different ways I could crop this picture. One would kind of be the narrow crop from the right especially, but also a little bit from the left. That will just give much more attention towards the actual house, which I do think works quite well, to be honest. But at the same time, it does change the feel by quite a bit, so I'm not sure which one I like better. You know what? Maybe I'm gonna go for an in-between here and just kind of crop out some of these branches on the right. I think I'm just gonna keep the crop in the middle like that, although this one also looks pretty good. You know what? Let me know in the comments down below which one you prefer. Maybe more this wide shot or kind of the in-between, or the very focused shot which is more simplistic but has less aerial view. It would be very interesting to know. But yeah, I'm just gonna stick there for now, I think. So yeah, with that being said, I'm done with the entire picture. Let's go down into the history here and see how the raw file looks. Now, not too bad actually. If you look at the raw file, it's very similar in terms of the lighting and the mood. But of course, at the end, it is still quite a big difference, mainly in terms of the colors, much more colorful, and also the contrast and mood was enhanced. I'm actually very happy with how this picture turned out at the end, because honestly, I think it looks much more interesting and colorful and just better at the end, but at the same time it has these core attributes as the raw file, which means it is very mysterious, soft lighting, and yeah, just not overdone at the end. I think this is where I'm gonna end it though, and just in case you're curious, I actually got some really cool videos planned for the future, one of which is gonna be an on location video where I go out and shoot a sunset. I shot this video already, I just have to edit it, so hopefully it will be up in a few weeks, but I got some amazing pictures from that. You will also see my face there, so gonna be at your own risk, and also have some ideas with editing a picture and then printing it and showing you the finished print and so on. You know, just in case you're interested in this kind of stuff. Anyways, once again, thank you very much and have an awesome day.